not available for some reason.
I would love to. I'm actually
Craziness, right?
So I want to welcome everybody tonight to End Books Boston Seaport, our newest store. We're Provincetown-based stores. We have 2 stores there, and we're excited to be here. It's been about a year here, and I'm just thrilled to have Sarah Schulman here and wTimothy McCarthy here tonight. And Sarah, I've known a very long time, and including going way, way back to the days when Outright Writers Group started. A long time ago.
1990.
Is that what it was? Yeah. It was a while ago. You know, we're getting up there. Right? It's like,
just yesterday.
but you know, really she's one of my favorite people. I mean, such a brilliant, intellectual, deep thinker, activist, not just somebody that writes, but who's been on the streets, you know, active and one of the, among the founders of ACT UP, writing for Village Voice and so many other publications. She's written, I think, in almost every genre. Have you written poetry?
I've never written a poem.
Okay,
That's too hard.
And she even had, I loved it, and all my friends did. She even wrote one detective book, Maggie Terry.
Of course.
Which, isn't that great? I love it. We'd love to see it at some point. But, and I think sometimes in the near future, we're going to see some of her brilliant plays as well produced. So we'll see. And then I know she's going to have some news she'll probably give us about Left Record Show, and I won't share that. But, so I wanted to let you know, I've been told that. But, so I wanted to let you know, we just have a couple of announcements. The next couple of events that are happening in this store, we head to June 5th with Patricia Falvey with the new novel, The Famine Orphans, which is an incredible book that's set in Ireland during the famine. And she's an amazing writer, so if you get a chance, that's information's on our website about that. And then on June 6th in Provincetown, I have an event with 20 Summers, the nonprofit that Julia Glass founded, author Julia Glass from Emerson, with Paul Lasicki. We already had our event here, but he's going to be with the musician and actor John Kelly. Conversation at the Hawthorne Barn. So if you're in Provincetown on June 6th, I don't know, it may be sold out already, but that's the next thing. And then I wanted to let you know that I am excited. I get excited about most things involving writers and actors. But we have an event here, Saturday, June 14th at 12 p.m. with the actor and co-star, the HBO hit Somebody Somewhere. So we have Jeff Hiller coming with his book that will be out in a couple weeks, Actress of a Certain Age. My 20-year trail to overnight success. And he's going to be here. We're going to have some food. It's kind of a come and have lunch with Jeff. So there'll be photo ops, there'll be a talk, food, whatnot. And then that's on Saturday. And then if you're in Provincetown on Sunday the 15th, he's getting an award from the film festival that's going on then. So that'll be happening. And a lot of events, we'll start to shift mid-June to Provincetown because everybody wants to be there in the summer. And we've got an amazing group of events. Check out the website. Sarah will be teaching what week?
First week in August.
Okay, and it's probably sold out. Is it?
No, I don't think
Maybe
so.
not. So if you have a chance to take a 1 week.
Oh, no, the workshop's sold
The
out.
workshop's sold out. She'll be
doing
doing a reading during that week. Sometime during the week, it'll be on the Fine Arts Work Center website, and it's a free reading. So if you happen to be there during that week or during that day, go and see her there at that event. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention for Boston, so since we're in Boston, is we have one of your colleagues, Stephanie Burt.
Yes, a classmate from college.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But Stephanie Burt's new book, Super Gay Poems, We'll have Stephanie, they will be at our store on June 29th in Provincetown. So if you can't get over there, we do live stream our events, and so the only difference is if the event is here, it's on our Facebook page, End Books Boston Seaport. If it's Provincetown, will be our End Books P-Town page. You'll have that there. We hope that you'll get onto our newsletter and see about all of our events and things that are going on. I wanted to mention two other final things. One is that and we have some newsletters back there on the table you can get later. I'm co-chairing the capital campaign for the Theater Offensive here in Boston, and it's such an amazing group. There's about a year old now, new executive director, CEO, Giselle Bird is an amazing person. We are, Chrissy Cashman, who some of you might know, the actress and author. Chrissy and I are co-chairing an event December 7th at the Quinn, the club that used to be the old Algonquin that Ken Folk created and helped create and design. And we're doing an event there, a special event there. So if you're around, and the tickets are not going to be, for regular people, tickets are not going to be expensive. The hosts and the sponsors will pay the money. So if you support the Theater Offensive, and it's going to be the kickoff for what will be the final round of money. There's been about $5-6 million raised. They're going to be having a theater building in the Fenway. So that'll be so if you support the Theater Offensive, if you are curious about the Quinn and want to get inside, you have to be a member. If you want to have amazing food, their newest restaurant is called Lunasol, which is kind of Brazilian style, São Paulo kind of. It's really amazing. That's where it's going to be. So we've got information about that back there. There'll be some programming here.
Can you say the date one more time?
It's December 7th, and there'll be publicity out soon about that event. So, and then I just wanted to put a little mention that two things. One is that if you feel like me and a lot of other people and want to express your feelings non-verbally, if you've ever heard of the weekly newsletter called Airmail, which Braden Carter, with formerly Communist and Variety Magazine, whatever, was editor-in-chief. It's a really cool weekly newsletter that looks at politics, culture, etc. He has a new tote bag out that I bought, which I think is amazing, and here it is. So that's Airmail, so you can check them out if you want to get something like that. So anyway, so the other thing too, I just want to say it's not only amazing to have Sarah here in our new store, but also to have Timothy McCarthy here from Harvard, who's doing such great work, and that institution which is being attacked seems like daily by the Orange Man in the White House. We could all say many things about universities, about what we're happy with, not happy with, but in the moment of time that we're in right now, I'm thrilled with Harvard University fighting back, and thrilled with, again, people have feelings all over it, but I'm thrilled with Penny Pritzker at the Harvard Corporate Board fighting back, and her brother, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, who I feel like they are two people that are not afraid to fight back against the tyranny that's happening in Washington, and I'm really thrilled with that fact. And I was saying to Sarah earlier that it makes me even prouder to be a globalist, lifetime globalist with the Hyatt Corporation, since they are two of the heirs of the Hyatt Corporation who are fighting back against Trump. So anyway, the book is phenomenal. Sarah's new book. I lost track of how many copies we've sold in both places, and I had all the shipping and all the web orders, and we had a huge number of web orders. So we're really on our website. So we're really thrilled about this book and having her here. And I'm going to say to you that we have her full biography on our event page on our website. I'm not going to go through all that, but again, it's very exciting to have both of them here for this conversation. After the conversation, they will be here to sign books and chat with you. And if you ordered a book on Eventbrite, you can pick that up from us afterwards. And if you didn't and want to buy the book, we've got the books here and you can get them signed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. We've been in the Palestine Solidarity Movement together for at least 15 years. Yes. And thank you, Jeff. So I'm going to read a little bit and then we're going to talk. Where are you going to go, Jeffrey?
Since you're going to stand, I'm going to go over here. That's
Okay.
perfect.
The zone of interest. I'm reading my Twitter, now X.
Excuse me, Madam. Would you mind using the wireless mics because we have the
Okay.
Facebook audience?
That'll be interesting.
Thank
You
you.
get to drop it later.
Okay. The zone of interest. I'm reading my Twitter, now X. I have two frantic feeds, neither of which knows the other exists. One is a multitude of posts about the Tony Awards of 2024 unfolding on television that evening. Counterposed on my X is an international, devastated, angry, desperate feed about the shattering of lives and futures in Gaza. These two conversations never seem to meet. I keep checking the posts about the Tony Awards to see if anyone says anything concerning the world or even our own nation. Finally, one winner calls for more arts funding. He says it's a requirement for a civilized society. But a few months before the Oscars, it was a little different. The winner in the category of international feature film was The Zone of Interest, a co-production of the UK, Poland, and the United States. Now, on the surface, The Zone of Interest is a Holocaust film about the Nazi commandant of Auschwitz, whose family home, where he raised his children, shared a wall with the extermination camp he oversaw. The film never enters the camp. We see the smoke, we hear some sounds, but the point of view lies strictly with the Nazi family on this side of the wall. On this side of the wall, they have a swimming pool, while the invisible people on the other side have no food. The people on this side have luxury items. They eat healthy, opulent meals. They give their children expensive presents. They tuck those children in and read them stories. Their servants clean their homes and change their sheets. We never see the others, but we know they are being exterminated. Had the zone of interest functioned only on the level of this story I just described, it would have been an exquisitely executed retread of information we already know and are in some ways comfortably familiar with. But there's a unique experience to watching this film, that wall. After a while, as we watch, the past and present resonate, and then they begin to merge. But all the transformation takes place inside us, the viewers. The film's narrative stays in the past, but its meaning engulfs the present. That wall becomes the Israeli separation wall, where one side fills swimming pools, while on the other side, Palestinians have no water. One side controls the other while tucking their children into sleep in comfortable beds, and now that side is eliminating the other. The winner, director and writer Jonathan Glazer, then takes this moment of personal recognition and almost trembling, not with happiness but with fear, he makes the following statement, quote, "All our choices were made to reflect and confront us in the present. Not to say, look what they did then. Rather, look what we do now." Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It's shaped all of our past and present. Right now we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Whether the victims of October the 7th in Israel, or the ongoing attack on Gaza, all the victims of this dehumanization, how do we resist? End quote. Now, in many ways, this is a modest statement, that the intense violence, murder, and cultural destruction that Jews experienced by Nazis produced the violence against Palestinians that Israel is committing today is a well-known interpretation of the cycle of violence, a frequent explanation of the current cataclysm that equates Israeli and Palestinian suffering. Glazer's work had already made this statement He wasn't coming to the stage like many predecessors, waiting for repetitive, familiar content, awkwardly squeezing in some unrelated political comment after thanking their agents. But I wondered if the people in the film industry who voted for him fully realized what the film was actually about, how intentional the dual meaning, which he had just confirmed in his acceptance speech. I wonder how many of them thought it was only about the victimization of the Jews and not also about the victimization by us. I wondered if there were people out there who thought The Zone of Interest was a sensitive, searing film about bad Nazis and poor us. Of course, he had to be punished for being one of the few public figures to speak the simple truth on American television, the truth that the entertainment and media industries have so studiously avoided that it sounded strange. That was March 10th, 2024. By March 18th, over 1,000 Jewish creatives and professionals signed their names to a public denunciation of Jonathan Glazer. No one had denounced this film before. Either they hadn't seen it or they had not understood it. Signers of this letter included executives, creators, directors, producers, and agents. They wrote, quote, "The use of words like occupation to describe an indigenous Jewish people defending a homeland that dates back thousands of years and has been recognized as a state by the United Nations distorts history," end quote. The United Nations does recognize the state of Israel, and it also recognizes that Israel has occupied Palestinian land. To quote from the United Nations official document, The Question of Palestine, quote, "In the 1967 war, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and East Jerusalem," end quote. I was surprised that so many powerful and intelligent people's first objection was to Glazer stating the globally recognized and simple fact that Israel has occupied land where Palestinians currently live or formerly lived. It is irrefutable that Palestinians' lives are controlled by Israel and they are occupied. I would have thought that the signers would justify that occupation, not claim that it doesn't exist. Equally peculiar is that so many worldly and in many cases secular people would use biblical justification for Jewish dominance of land that is inhabited by more than one people. It is certainly true that there have been Arab Jews coexisting with Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, and Druze throughout different empires and collective histories. Jews were an integrated part of the Arab world before the current created false binary of Jew versus Arab. 40 to 50% of Jews in Israel are of Arab origin, from a range of nations, including Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Morocco, and Palestine. And so Arab Jews were among the range of peoples indigenous to the region, but for over 1,000 people who have significant roles in the corporate creation of American arts and entertainment, to think that Jews are the only indigenous people to that area, or that European Jews are indigenous to the Middle East, simply doesn't make any sense. The letter further stated that these 1,000 Jews believe that Glazer's statement, quote, "gives credence to the modern blood libel that fuels a growing anti-Jewish hatred around the world," end quote. Now, blood libel is an anti-Semitic claim originating in the Middle Ages, falsely accusing Jews of vampirishly using the blood of Christian children to make Passover matzah. It is pretty crazy that so many people were willing to sign a letter interpreting Glazer's call for an end to using the Holocaust to justify murdering Palestinians as the same as him saying that Jews killed Christian children to make matzah. Medieval Jews, who were a vulnerable and often blamed minority, did not kill Christian children, but the 1,000 signers are betraying an unconscious association because Israelis with American money are killing children daily and in large numbers. I'm sitting in LA across the table from an old friend I love and respect. She is smart, kind, hardworking. From a modest Jewish background, she has earned millions of dollars working in corporate television. She is so upset about Israel's violence in Gaza, she is devastated. She looks around to make sure no one in the restaurant can hear her criticize Israel. She won't sign anything. She won't say anything in public. It could hurt her professionally. This is a common response I've heard from many people. They're afraid to say what they believe to be true because of the 1,000 people who signed their names and the thousands more who didn't sign but feel the same way. My feeling is that, yes, doors will close, but those people don't control everything. Other doors will open. In some strange way, my silent friends believe the myth that the Zionist Jews who are punitive against other perspectives actually do control all the entertainment industries. I, on the other hand, do not believe that. Let's face it, if my friends were correct, you would not be reading this book right now, and it wouldn't have been published by Penguin Random House. It takes until April 5th to gather 500 signatures to a new document carefully titled Jewish Creatives Supporting Jonathan Glazer's Oscar Speech. Quote, "We honor the Holocaust by saying never again for anyone. We should be able to name Israel's apartheid and occupation without being accused of rewriting history," end quote. The letter includes producers, actors, writers, directors, and members of the Israeli film industry. Some of the people who signed were Deborah Winger, Todd Haynes, Chloe Feynman, Elliot Gould, Joaquin Phoenix, Joel Cohn, Hari Neff, James Shamus, Mike Lee, Wallace Shawn, Emma Seligman, Annie Baker, Molly Crabapple, Nicole Eisenman, Nan Golden, Miranda July, Naomi Klein, Jonathan Latham, Francine Prose, Lynn Tillman, and many others, and me. Thank you.
Where's this going? Just press it?
It's on.
Oh, it's on?
Yeah, just.
Oh, okay, great. All right, Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you, friend. I've watched your national book tour online, and so I'm glad you finally come here to Boston to be with us. So thank you for being here. And thank you for that essay and all of the work that went into all the writing that went into this book. And I have a million questions for you, which obviously we don't have time for tonight. I read the book, and then I thought about some things, I went and read some other things, and then I just started to write questions down, and it was like a cascade of things, and I was like, my God, this is going to take 15 years to get through all this, but and there'll be more questions then. So I'll just go through a couple of them and try to lift some out here. And I guess I want to start actually with that essay, because there are a couple of things in that essay. I mean, there are a number of things in that piece that strike me. One is the sort of the self-silencing that so often goes on, both with respect to criticisms of Israel and the connection to the present day and sort of how we're implicated, but also the self-silencing around Palestinian solidarity and Palestinian, the belief or the conviction that Palestinian people deserve to be free, have land, live in dignity, not be subjected to war and violence and death all the time. Why do you think that there's so much self-silencing, both of critiques of Israel and of solidarity with Palestinians?
Well, there's so many reasons for that. Solidarity can have a cost.
Mm-hmm.
You can lose access, you can lose status, you can lose relationships, you can lose your job. Like Rachel Corrie, you can lose your life. The problem is that we're in a situation where we know that if we do nothing, that all of that is going to happen. Mm-hmm. So we really have no choice.
Yeah.
So there's all that fear. And then there's the false accusations that everyone's a terrorist and, that if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic, which was a lie that was created by the Zionist movement and they've lost control of it. It's been taken over by Christian nationalists. In fact, there's an organization called Christians United for Israel. It has have 10 million paid members, which is more than all the Jews in the United States. So this argument has been seized, which is pretty interesting.
Now I want to know where that money goes. That's a lot of, anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
It goes to Virginia Fox and the Congressional Committee.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
our friends. So I want to ask a question about solidarity. One of the expressed motivations for writing this book is that you want to make solidarity more possible or more accessible for people to engage with and to engage in and to practice. And yet you talk about solidarity both as a fantasy and as a necessity, right? It's the title of the book, but you delve into what you mean by those two things. And it feels to me like on the face of it, if you were just looking at the title or you were looking at the introduction, you might think that solidarity as fantasy and solidarity as necessity are actually in contradiction with one another, certainly in tension. So if you could talk a little bit about why is solidarity a fantasy and a necessity simultaneously, and how do we wrap our head around that?
Thank you. So the purpose of this book is to make solidarity more doable.
Yeah.
And my idea is to get rid of all of our ideas about solidarity being heroic, about perfection, and about pure motive. I think those things are fantasies, and they're obstructive. What solidarity really is a process of making mistakes and constantly evolving your self-concept. And if we can embrace that as the experience, it'll become a lot more possible. In the olden days, the concept of solidarity was horizontal. You have the workers in the shop and you have the boss. And if the workers organize, they can win better working conditions. But now the boss is a globalized conglomerate. So horizontal solidarity sometimes isn't enough. And you have to reach out to other people. And the two main communities that I see are bystanders, as to say people who are not personally implicated but know that something unjust is going on, or conflicted perpetrators like myself, people who come from a group of people who are involved in committing these war crimes and in this mass murder, and that I belong to Jewish Voice for Peace, and people like ourselves who feel like we must stand up and say that we oppose this. But then what happens with this elongated community is that solidarity becomes a relationship rooted in inequality, and so it's fraught. And so the idea that we can just step in and fix everything and come out as heroes and be loved is a supremacy concept. And we just need to get rid of that and be willing to make mistakes and be wrong.
Yeah, I love that. And that seems to shift the notion of solidarity from a kind of outcome to an ongoing practice, right? And then the ongoing practice is always going to be fraught and imperfect and so forth, and it's not necessarily going to come with the goods at the end or the prize or the trophy, but it's just something you do.
Can I give an example?
Sure.
Okay, so the book is filled with lots of interesting, weird individuals and movements you've probably never heard of, but that I think are interesting, that tried very creative approaches to solidarity and won a little something, because that's all you can really get, right? So one of the examples is when Franco died, the fascist dictator of Spain, abortion was illegal in Spain, and it was illegal for Spanish women to leave Spain to get abortions, which is something that fascist states in the United States are trying to recreate now. But France was having this big feminist thing going on. So these women in the south of France started to help Spanish women cross the border to get abortions. And they would give them each a task. When you get home, take a phone call from some other woman who wants to do this, or bring back a box of diaphragms or something like that. No one would ever do it. So the French women finally realized that these Spanish women had spent their whole lives living under fascism. They had completely internalized, they were acculturated to the fascist mentality. So then they had to ask themselves, was this project a fail? And they said no, because they got these abortions that they needed. That was the necessity. The idea that this would make them be just like us, that was the fantasy.
I love that. I actually love all of these wild, offbeat, essential, amazing stories of all the throughout history. Really, it's not just there's so many interesting vignettes about these cases that happen, these examples that do shed different kinds of light on the different meanings of solidarity that you're getting at in the book. And I'm wondering if we could zoom out for a second and talk a little bit about why this book and why now. Like this book in some ways is a kind of tapestry or a sort of mosaic of different kinds of things, right? Different types of writing, different kinds of voices, different vignettes and examples from history and the present. You're weaving a lot together here, as you always do. You always contain multitudes, which is one of the things I love about you. And so, could you talk a little bit about like how you put this together, what you decided, and how you decided what went in here, how you wove it together into this really beautiful, book that's very different from a lot of your other books and a lot of books that are out there.
Well, thank you. So,
And why now?
okay. Well, I've written books that are like conventional narratives. Starts at the beginning, and the people go through experiences, and then there's a transformation, and then there's an end. But I've also been really influenced my whole life by experimental film, by avant-garde art. I'm part of the whole downtown East Village thing, and it really formed me. And always have been very interested in juxtaposition. What happens when you put pieces together intentionally, and how they resonate, and then how this creates a whole other layer. So my nonfiction books are kind of written like novels, in that it's cumulative. You accrue understanding as you're reading, and hopefully by the end, something is revealed. And that's why some of these nonfiction books, if you just read one chapter, you're not going to understand you have to read the whole book. So this one is like that. So also Conflict is Not Abuse was like that as well. And I feel like when something is complex, we used to say that that conventional narrative structure was the straight life story. Romance, marriage, motherhood. And for men it was romance, marriage, war, fatherhood. And that queer life was better expressed by formal invention. Of course now gay people have gotten more boring, so it's not as true as it once was. But so I've always had that interest in form. The reason it's now is because, there was October 7th, and then October 16th I published an article in New York Magazine trying to contextualize October 7th. And from, I've been at this for a long time, and you get all those emails, you capo, you're a Jew in name only, you should have a Rachel Corrie moment, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of doors do close. I was doing a project. I'm now realizing we're on live stream. It's not just us here, so I won't say what it was. But I had a big project taken away and whatever. But then I got a phone call from this woman, Nikki Papadopoulos, at Thesis Books at Penguin Random, and she's like, "I really liked your article. Can I meet you?" And we sat down and started talking, and we realized there was a book there. So, that's why I said some doors close and some doors open. And more people all over the world, millions of people, are in the streets opposing this brutality. And yes, people are very afraid. And this is a spotlight on each of us. As my girlfriend says, she's a slavery scholar. And she's like, if you ever wondered what you would have done during the radical abolition movement, it's what you're doing now. But more and more people are realizing that they have to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask a question because, you define solidarity in different ways in this. You give us different examples, and I couldn't help but think like how your understandings of solidarity are interplayed or interconnected with things like empathy or equality or reciprocity, right? Our friends Darnell Moore and Atshan, who were part of the delegation that you helped put together for a bunch of us queers to go to Palestine.
The first LGBT delegation to Palestine.
Right,
in
2011, I believe, right? Which was a life-changing trip for me. As you know, we've had lots of conversations about that. And Darnell and Saed and I had lots of conversations on that trip, and they wrote a piece on reciprocal solidarity about queer and Black and Palestinian friendship, solidarity, love. There's lots woven into that. So I'm wondering, how do you think of your idea of solidarity, your understanding of this in relationship to those other terms, which are very powerful in justice work, right? Things like empathy, things like equality or equity, things like reciprocity or coalition. How do you think about solidarity in relationship to those things?
Well, I'm really influenced by my experience in ACT UP.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a 600-page history of ACT UP New York.
Which is amazing.
Thank you. And so Jim Hubbard and I interviewed 188 surviving members of ACT UP over 18 years. So I do feel like I kind of get what happened there. And, you know, my takeaway is that the reason that ACT UP was so successful, in fact, even though everything we want is being destroyed in this very moment, but up until this point, it was one of the most successful social movements of our time. And I think one of the main reasons is because they did not operate on a consensus model. Like if this was ACT UP and you had an idea and I thought it was terrible, I would yell and scream at you because, you know, it was New York. But it was just like a lot of conflict. It was productive in that environment. But in the end, I wouldn't try to stop you from doing your idea. If I didn't like it, I just wouldn't do it. Then I would get my 5 friends and we would do the other idea. So this is radical democracy. Radical democracy is the acceptance of difference with a bottom line. And what this allowed, this structure, was the simultaneity of response, where there's so many different kinds of actions going on at the same time, aimed at different milieu, using different aesthetics, that this is what creates the paradigm shift. So it's not about everybody loves each other and we're all so happy and we all are in agreement. No, it's an embrace of conflict and difference. Because political movements that try to force everyone into one analysis or one strategy have all failed. And there's no exceptions to that. And the reason for that is, like, people are different. And I know it's so hard to accept. Like, I've been in therapy for 40 years trying to accept that people are different. But people can only be where they're at. So, like, good leadership is something that helps people be effective where they're at. So that's where I get these feelings about solidarity as something of conflict, discomfort, dissonance, and difference. You know, Sarah Schulman says that if you want to live in a world where you're always comfortable, it means everyone else will have to be suppressed. So the healthier the community, the more discomfort we'll feel.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wanted to ask, since you brought up ACT UP, and I will say, Let the Record Show is a brilliant book. One of the things that I teach it in my course called Queer Nation, and the students are always like, do we have to read the whole thing? And I'm like, if you're lucky. Of course they don't.
Thank you, Laura.
Exactly. It's an amazing book. But we assign excerpts because that's where we are. I'll have a question about the modern university in a minute. But ACT UP, you say a line in the book where you talk about the Palestine Solidarity Movement has a lot to learn from ACT UP, right, in the direct action approach, the radical democratic direct action approach that you're mentioning. And I'm wondering what you mean when you say that, like what this kind of solidarity movement, which is obviously different from ACT UP, but you know, has, you say, much to learn from it. And then also, what can we learn from, like, those of us who are involved in lots of different kinds of justice work or whatever kind of work advancing these kinds of things? What can we learn from the Palestine Solidarity Movement?
Right, well, let's start with that.
Yep.
So in the book, I reprint this article that came recently from the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, the Palestinian movement. It's called The Argument for Strategic Radicalism. And it's aimed at the student movement in the United States. And it says, every context has different things that you can actually win. Don't make demands that you can't win. You need to make demands that are reasonable, winnable, and doable. This is what Martin Luther King did. This is what ACT UP did. You become the expert on your issue because you don't want to be infantilized by asking the powers that be to fix everything because they're not gonna. They don't want to and they don't know how. You design the solution that is reasonable, winnable, and doable. You propose it to the powers that be. They say no, and then you do, creative disobedience to communicate through the media to the public that you have a reasonable solution. So, for example, boycott, divestment, sanctions was a marginal strategy for many years, but today, divestment is the main demand of the student movement in the United States because divestment is winnable. It's material. Students won divestment for apartheid South Africa. We already know it's winnable. But then they say, don't criticize other contexts for having a different approach because different things are possible in different places. And then they say, don't factionalize. That is so important. Every community in this country is under attack right now. We're all so different. You know, if you're from Salvador, you don't want to be kidnapped. And if you're a Harvard professor, you don't want to lose your research money. And there might be a tiny bit of overlap between those two groups, but not a lot. And they're having completely different life experiences. To ask these two groups to see the world the same way is ridiculous, but they're being opposed by the same force. So we have to be more flexible in these Big Ten politics. Like, I just want to say something. Look at this Pope. We've been quelling over this new Pope, right? And you know, he's anti-gay, he's against abortion, but he's great on immigration and migrants, and he might be helpful. So you can't just say, I hate the Catholic Church, I'm not going to cooperate. We have to cooperate. It's kind of like emotional maturity. I don't know what else to call it. We have to be able to cooperate where we agree and walk away where we don't. And I think that that's what Palestine means by don't factionalize.
I'm laughing because I too have been in therapy for 40 years because of the fucking Catholic Church. So I can say that about the Catholic Church, but to your point, I always say like all popes are anti-gay and misogynistic. Like that's like check, and then we move to other things. And you're right, he is good on those things. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. This isn't about that. How does solidarity make space for disagreements, not just differences in thinking about tactics and strategy, but disagreements, like ethical, moral disagreements about things like violence or nonviolence as a strategy for social change. Things like, you know, someone might be okay with part of BDS, but not all of BDS. Someone may not be comfortable yet using the word genocide, and yet they're absolutely appalled by what's going on in Gaza, calling for ceasefires out in the streets, right? How do you think about solidarity, especially when the demands for solidarity sometimes do come with a set of very clear expectations for people who are in solidarity? How do you navigate that? Because that feels to me to be one of the trickiest pieces of this, right?
Okay. So the first thing is everyone has a bottom line. Mm-hmm. And we all have different bottom lines based on who we are and what we've experienced. And you're not going to be able to force other people to have a different bottom line than they currently have. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I've learned, let me say, being in Palestine Solidarity for 16 years, I may have made mistakes every day. I mean, and I've done some things that I'm not even going to tell you about because they're so stupid. But one of the things I've learned is that Palestine is a multidimensional society like any other. Mm-hmm. And it'll never act as a block because like every society, it's filled with factions. It's not my job to decide which faction I like, which faction I think is good, or which strategy I think Palestine should do, or what image of their future I think they should have. I have nothing to do with that. My job is to stop the United States from giving money to Israel. I have to stay in my lane, you know, because every time we give Israel $1 billion, that's tax money. That's our public money that should be spent on arts, education, and health. We give it to Israel, and then they buy munitions from American companies. So all this money, we're losing. The money's going into their pockets, and the collateral damage is the slaughter of Palestinians. That's what this is. So that's where we stay. So I had to learn I don't need to weigh in on all of that, you know. But then the other issue you're raising is intention. I think we should ban the concept of pure intention. It doesn't exist. In the book, I have a whole chapter on Jean Genet, the French novelist. And you know, he was a great friend of Palestine. He wrote a really important book on the slaughter in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. Arafat gave him a pass through Palestine. He was at the beginning of the openly queer solidarity movement with Palestine. Mm-hmm. But when you look in his life, you find out that, you know, he was into Arab guys. I mean, he was. Mm-hmm. You know, because no one's a saint. And it doesn't matter why you're doing it. What matters is what is the actual consequence of your action. So we have to just get rid of this idea of purity. And I've been on this for a long time. I've written a lot of books against purity, but I think right now, I just want to say one more point on this. I've noticed that a lot of people have just come into this movement in the last year and a half. And they can't believe how bad it is. And the more they learn about how long this has been going on, the more devastated they are, but the more ashamed they are that they didn't intervene in the past. And sometimes people become ultra-left because of that, because they want it to be fixed right away. And it can't be fixed right away. We're in a fascist cataclysm. And there's no quick fix. All we can do is build infrastructure for the future. Like the Palestine Solidarity Movement, the big groups like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace, they're 30 years old. People have written books. We have a strategy, boycott, divestment, sanctions. We have concepts, pinkwashing. Infrastructure has been built for this movement. And that's what we can do, is advance thinking, is expand our relationships with people, build more social connection, because there is no quick fix. And we have to accept that.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, when I mentioned before that delegation in 2011 that you organized, that I went on, I said it was transformative before, because when you see, the thing I said to everyone when I came back was, I cannot unsee what I've seen. Whether it's the older Palestinian woman who's being humiliated at gunpoint by a 21-year-old in a checkpoint because she's going to get medicine, right? Or the older Palestinian man who welcomed us to his home while we were on a bus, and it was raining, and it was just a grassy field. There was no village there. There was no town, but that's where he was raised and then expelled from. But he welcomed us home to this field where there were no people anymore, right? And I mean, over and over and over again, those stories. The moment Kendall Thomas, I'll never forget this. Kendall Thomas and I were walking down the street in Hebron, and we had been debating. The group had been debating about language, and like the language of apartheid, for instance, as a sort of useful salient term for what was going on there. And many of us, this was the first time we'd been. And I remember we had been talking to this, and then all of a sudden we're walking down the street. We were told to get on the Israeli side of the street, right, by armed guards, IDF officers, on the other, and we had been walking on the Palestinian side, Kendall and they moved us to the other side. And then Kendall just looked at me and said, "I think we can call this apartheid." And I remember that vividly. He and I still talk about that moment. And so, like, those moments of not just recognition and witness, but of like shattering the myths and shattering the cultivated ignorance that leads to the silence that prevents the solidarity, right, is so important. And one of the things that I've been very moved by, and this is dissipated and been actually dissipated since the pandemic, of course, for obvious reasons, and then resisted by the administration of my university and others. But the students have organized all these treks, right, to go there on their own, right? And I always meet with them, and there's an Israel trek and a Palestine trek, separate treks, at the Kennedy School, and the students sort of line up, and it causes obviously a lot of tension in the student body. And every year while I was still there on the faculty, the students would come and ask me to host sort of pre-sessions, pre-truck sessions, discussions and so forth, and then afterwards come back and debrief and have these, and they were always very difficult, especially afterwards, very difficult conversations, because they had been in the same place and seen such different things. And then coming home and reckoning with that was always so difficult. But it was so important to do that work, and like that's what a university should be doing. And yet they resist it at every turn. And that's a long, sort of Rachel Maddow-like stem-winding introduction to the question about campuses and our campuses. You and I are both professors. We live our lives on campuses, different kinds of campuses. Campuses are on fire right now, and a lot of that on fire has to do with big debates certainly about Gaza, about Palestinian solidarity, about Israel, about anti-Semitism, right? All of these things, and it's the mind reels with all that's going on. And I'm wondering if you Because I, every day, try to figure out how to make sense of this. People ask me about it all the time. I often find myself incoherent, even though I try to think as coherently as possible. But this is so fraught and so complicated. I'm wondering, how do you, when people ask you, like, why is all this popping off on campuses now? What's going on, Sarah? How do we make sense of this? Why are the kids so this, that, or the other thing? How do you respond to those questions?
I think the kids are amazing.
I do too.
I think the students are the people who are taking responsibility.
I do too.
And, you know, we should listen to them. I'm the faculty advisor to Jewish Voice for Peace at my campus, Northwestern University. My kids have been disciplined. I've gone to their disciplinary hearings. They don't care anymore. You know, people know they're going to be expelled.
Yeah.
Look at these valedictorians. They know they're going to be punished, but they have to tell the truth. And what's happening is students are getting alienated from these institutions, these hierarchical institutions of status that they killed to get into. Now they don't care. And that's so great, you know, because it produces counterculture, because it makes them question all of this. You know, what's interesting is so much is being torn down in our country, and the way it's being torn down is so destructive, but a lot of what's being brought down was dysfunctional and unjust in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it gives us this opportunity to think about, what do we really want? What do we think universities should be like? What do we think healthcare should be? What do we think the NEA was like very ineffective? It affected a very small group of people. I mean, what do we think arts funding should be? You know, this is a chance to have all those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe one more?
I was going to say, I do have one more question,
Okay.
but I'm going to save it to the end.
Okay, let's go to the end.
Interlocutor. No. I want to.
Oh, okay.
I want to open it up now, and then I'm going to ask you one thing at the end and read from your book.
Okay.
So, open. Anybody can ask it.
Disagreement
Should we
is
pass?
also okay.
Why don't I pass that around?
Well, I actually did have a question that came up. It's great to see you.
Yeah,
By the way.
hi.
Congratulations. I'm very interested in this fantasy and necessity of solidarity with the Christian Zionists and the Zionists that are, you know, running the country, and because the Christian Zionists are also anti-Semitic. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about what is the fantasy in this relationship, and what is the necessity of it? I mean, I think maybe one is more obvious than the other for me. Growing up in the church and understanding a little bit about this, I don't even know if it's a real this necessity, but I'm really interested in how you would connect those things.
Well, so it has to do with apocalyptic religious ideas about end times. And the people who are calling university presidents in and accusing them of anti-Semitism on television are not Jewish. They're like Virginia Fox, who's born-again Baptist, Lee Stefanik from Harvard, who's Catholic. And they have, some of them are sincere in their religious commitments and some of them are not. But they have seized on this lie that was developed by the Zionist movement about anti-Semitism, and now they're using it to take down the university system. I want to say honestly that no one is being persecuted on any campus because they are Jewish. That is not happening. What is happening is that people who identify with Israel or support the current policies of the Israeli government are being trained to feel that people who oppose them are somehow abusing them or threatening them. Because they're in a supremacy position. And the supremacy position is that don't make me question myself because then I will feel uncomfortable and that is an attack. And institutions like Hillel and these types of Zionist student groups and groups like CAN, C-A-A-N, they are fostering this paranoia and distortion in the students. So they use these words of feeling. They feel unsafe. They are being told that being challenged means that they feel unsafe. And they're equating feeling unsafe with being murdered. with being starved, with being subjected to thirst as a war crime.
Yeah.
That's how much supremacy is instilled in those views.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions?
Or a comment, maybe about a
Or whatever.
So I have,
A poem, whatever.
so I think there's traction happening when I listen to NPR or whatever, and people are challenging the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And I'm hearing pro-Israeli people who are being interviewed are saying, well, of course, it's fine to critique Israeli policies. And indeed, that's happening in Israel itself. So I feel like I'm seeing more of that sort of acknowledgement and traction happening, which I think is a result of all these different approaches that people are taking to try to untether those two ideas. But I still feel like we're sort of losing that battle, right? So I'm just wondering if you have ideas about what you think are like, other than just like generalized, take whatever track you think is a good track to take and get your people together and do it. Are there some tracks you feel like are going to be more successful at pushing in this little bit of wedge of untethering those concepts?
Well, you may not like this answer, but I favor all strategies at this point. And I feel like if there's any organization out there that you can tolerate, join it. Whether it's your block association or Jewish Voice for Peace or Working Families Party or whatever. And if you hate everybody, get 2 friends and get together with them in person once a week and read the newspaper. Because between the internet and COVID, our human relational community foundations have crumbled, and we need to rebuild. And I think, the other thing is that activism does produce community. People don't realize that, but you come out the other side with all kinds of other relationships, and we need relationships.
Other questions, comments?
Sarah, I was curious what you both think about, oh, sorry, thank you.
Multitasking.
Think about the, this, and you touched on this earlier, about this concept that if you oppose the policies of the current regime in Israel and what's happening in Gaza, that equates to, and this false narrative that it equates to you being anti-Semitic, and tying that to the blueprint in Project 2025, where this was a part of that early on, to really
Any sphere of independent thought. They also have this DEI obsession. These are these totally unqualified white men who believe that every woman and person of color in this whole country who's accomplished anything, it's because they were given special treatment because of DEI. They believe this.
They do.
Like they fire a black 4-star general and replace him with a white 3-star general. I mean, that's what they do. So, they're real fascists. And that's what we're really dealing with. So it's the combination of their own personal resentments, and then this desire to, we know they want to steal all the wealth of the country and get it back in their tax deductions. This big bill that they're doing, it's basically to take all the money from the poor and give it to the rich, money from women and children and give it to men, money from young people and give it to old people. I mean, that's what they want to do, and that's what they're doing. So, those are the connections. Fortunately, Tim's organization is very wealthy. And
Not my organization.
really, Tim.
I'm still waiting for the trickle down on that one.
Well, tell us more, Tim.
and we'll see if they can contest. Of course, the problem is there's no enforcement system for judicial decision.
Yeah. That's one of the constant mantras of protests on our campus over the years that I have been singing since at least the Living Wage campaign, is that Harvard is the second wealthiest nonprofit in the world next to the Vatican. It just rolls right out of me. So getting back to the Catholic Church, which I'll always find a way to connect to.
Maybe that's why I want to go to Harvard to
just curious about your comments on this, and I know we spoke a lot, like you gave your example about the Pope, who he agrees about certain issues, and he doesn't agree about many issues. So it kind of reminded me, and they could not be similar comparisons, like you can say that like maybe it's not the best comparison, but you know, during the elections, there was like a lot of discussion about the need to choose between the lesser people, and basically if you weren't voting blue, you were basically voting for Trump, and kind of, there was like a huge mess, I would say, in regards to just because you didn't agree with certain stances that they had, you still should give your vote to them, kind of, and it was just leading to so much, a lot of mess, basically. So I just want to know what your comments were based on that.
Well, I think it was unreasonable to ask Palestinian people or Arab people to vote for Kamala Harris. And people did everything they could to try to have reconciliation with the Democratic Party, and the party rejected them over and over and over again. On the other hand, I do think there are some decent people in the Democratic Party, and Jewish Voice for Peace has an electoral arm called JVP Action, and they've supported, you know, Rashida Tlaib. She spoke at our national conference that we just had a few weeks ago. And Ilhan Omar, and there's a number of people in Congress that we support. And that's all we can do. I mean, everyone has to make a decision about how they want to negotiate this. And, you know, the Democratic Party hasn't done what it needs to do to propose. I mean, people like Cory Booker are totally bought by AIPAC, you know, and he votes terribly, and then he's presented as a liberal. Even your friend Rachel Maddow, if you Google Rachel Maddow in Gaza, I think nothing comes up, you know. So I mean, we don't have the leadership that we want. Yeah.
I was just gonna say to a similar
Wait,
note.
get the mic.
I just, one thing that was making me crazy was I just felt like no one was talking about Cori Bush, you know, like when everyone was talking about voting for Kamala, and I don't know, I just wonder if you also noticed that it felt like nobody seemed
Well,
to
I mean,
care when
JVP
AIPAC
did endorse and work for Cory Bush. She was taken down by AIPAC.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just feel like after that happened, it just felt like there wasn't much said about it.
Well, in certain
Or you
places, it's so hard to
witnessing
get
that.
information, but you know, if you just put your email on the JVP website, you'll hear a lot about it.
Well, I don't mean from JVP, but
No, I mean from the mainstream media, no,
Sure.
that's a disaster.
Yeah.
The New York Times lies every day about Palestine and Israel. And, you know, MSNBC is the Democratic Party, Fox.
yes.
Yeah, yes.
So you're talking about resisting supremacy culture in general and about imperfection. And I'm curious whether you think that anyone in the constituted United States, built on the stealing of land from yet another group of people, has a moral leg to stand on to say, oh, well, we did it, but Israel shouldn't do it. What is the relationship between broader supremacy cultures that exist all over the world around the theft of land, and how Americans can stand honestly and say, well, Israel can't do it, but we are living here on the Wampanoag's land?
Well, you're right. This is a country that was built on slavery and genocide. That's
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
true. And none of us are morally pure.
Right.
But in 2005, Palestinian civil society developed a strategy, boycott, divestment, sanctions, and they asked us, internationals, to boycott Israeli state-sponsored institutions. And so I'm doing it.
Right.
And if other people ask me to do things, I try to do those things too. And it doesn't mean that I'm clean, or that I'm doing every good thing that needs to be done, or that I'm not hypocritical in some way. It doesn't mean any of those things. But I don't want my government giving our money to Israel to slaughter Gazans. And so I feel like I have to respond to that. That's not the only thing I respond to.
Can I add a comment about that?
Yeah.
So one thing that comes to mind for me is, in response to your question, is that both the indigenous Palestinian peoples and the American Indian, Indigenous, Native American peoples are, not all, but largely, as far as I've noticed, both making demands for land back, which I think is very telling in a lot of ways. And that I don't think it particularly matters whether the United States is in a morally upright position to be, like, as a country somehow, making stands in solidarity with the people of Palestine. I don't think that's necessarily the right question to be asking. I think it's more so, what are we doing as people who hold varying degrees of power, but particularly as citizens of the United States, to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples worldwide, both in Palestine and in the on Turtle Island as well. I think those aren't separate questions necessarily.
Then we'll come back here.
So I feel you might not be the right person to ask about this because you have done activism interwoven in your career a long time. What I'm seeing, I have some friends who are very involved in BDS, Palestinian activism, and they are hurting. They've also been doing this a long time. And I guess my question is, what keeps you going through difficult times, hopeless times? I heard you use the word cataclysm earlier. I think the other set of people I'm seeing are people that are newer to this and are sort of being exposed to horrors they haven't had to contemplate before. So I would, wonder what you would have to say to those people as well. And then just what allows you to gather strength when you sort of feel.
Well, I'm very privileged because I was in ACT UP. And so I'm one of the few people who had an experience of being in a movement that succeeded to some degree. So I know that it can. Because, AIDS lasted, AIDS still exists, but the epicenter of AIDS lasted for 15 years of hell. And people thought we were never going to get out of it. And it was such a nightmare. And that somehow this despised group of people, who had been abandoned by their families and their government, facing a terminal disease for which there were no treatments, joined together and forced the country to change against its will. So I know it's possible. But it's not going to happen like that. That's the thing.
Really quickly on that point, I was doing a lot of reading on the American Indian movement and its internationalist work. There's some really good stuff if you look into it on Palestine and the American Indian movement. My question was about how you think we pull people out of the stupor of just being preoccupied with federal elections and into thinking locally, who are more activated by that, every 2 years or every 4 years, the cycle, or the constant running for election that every representative and elected official is doing, and how that can cloud our ability to look locally at where we can actually have more targeted action. And I think a lot of the BDS stuff actually has been a great example in folks in the greater Boston area looking locally, because so much of that stuff is headquartered here, in terms of the U.S. headquarters.
Well, it's by creating alternatives for people. Just building your vision is an attraction, because people need victories. And this election cycle that you're talking about does not produce those. It doesn't produce any kind of satisfaction of change. But if you have a great idea and you can get, 5 people can do so much, it's incredible. ACT UP at its height only had 700 people. It's the critical mass is the issue, not getting everybody. You need a small group of people who are effective. And I just want to say something about being effective. You know, one problem with the left is that we do something and it doesn't work, and then we do it again and it doesn't work, and we do it again. It's like, if it doesn't work, don't do it. The thing that works is building campaigns. The way you build a campaign is you make a demand and then you have an action on that demand. And then, you know, because if you just have an action and you have no demand, you can't win anything. And that's a mistake that the left makes all the time. How many people here have spent hours standing in the rain, listening to a speaker tell you something you already know? That does not work. I'm serious.
And the sun and the snow.
One more question?
Yeah, yeah.
I guess going off of that a bit, how then does one, or how do we as groups of people build movements that are sustainable?
Well, I'm not saying I don't think movements are sustainable, but you know, they have to change. But if you have a demand that's possible, if you build a campaign, if you build a community infrastructure gradually and not expect that you're going to be able to triumph, and you try to get some victories and be creative, then you attract people and you build community, and it's not going to last forever. Let me just close with an example of a really creative solidarity that's in the book. In 1980, I wrote for this feminist newspaper called Woman News. And in those days, every city had a feminist newspaper and a gay newspaper, and some of them had more than one. And we get this press release from something called New York Prostitutes Collective. They're having a press conference. So I go to the press conference, and all the TV stations, there were only 3 in those days, CBS, NBC, and ABC, are there with cameras because the prurient interest, right, of New York Prostitutes Collective. And then the person steps out, and it's a black woman who's a butch lesbian named Wilmette Brown. And she announces on live TV feed into the 6 o'clock news that New York Prostitutes Collective is announcing that prostitutes in New York are raising their prices for the Democratic Convention.
Oh my God.
This is the most brilliant act of strategy I have ever seen. It didn't take much, and she got the word out, and I'm sure a lot of people got to raise their prices.
Oh my God.
That's amazing. Can I do one thing here? So the very end of this book, you have a really moving closing that and it really hit me again today when I was reading this last part. If you will allow me to read it. This is why people are in the streets. This is why campuses are demanding divestment. This is why writers boycotted Penn. This is why our organizations must make public statements of solidarity to end complicity with genocide. This moment is a huge spotlight on every one of us, and I'm actually surprised by some individuals' unpredictable integrity and others' unpredictable greed. We are each showing our true selves. Within this process, there are many challenges, including the most personal one, to strive to be coherent. This involves being willing to be thought of as strange or annoying and being outside other people's approval systems. It is a risk to undertake the imposed loss of credibility that brings with it a loss of influence when we challenge power directly. But being in solidarity means giving each other the approval and support, the insight and strength, the love, if you will, to continue to transform our relationships to status, safety, institutions, and the machinery of approval, whether from our families, our professions, the state, or the standards constantly fed us from corporate entertainment, which includes media. There is a kind of happiness that comes from trying to be a consistent person, and sometimes that is the only obtainable goal, to try. After all, there is a pleasure in thinking for yourself that, once it finds a home, becomes rejuvenating, fascinating, and life-giving. No power structure is stagnant. Healing takes place in relationship, and that is personal and also social. New approaches, understanding, and conversations are needed now and will always be needed. Solidarity is our way of life, and to keep it breathing, innovation is our friend. My motto for these coming years is don't stop yourself from doing what you think is right. Make them stop you. And I hope to keep to that in solidarity with many of you. I love that ending. It moved me today almost to tears when I read it again. And I'm just wondering, and it relates actually to the question about finding strength. Like, what keeps that search for consistency, which is something you've been able to achieve unlike a lot of other people that I know in our circles and way beyond them. But what allows you to sort of hold steadfast to that?
Well, you know, the only thing that we can control is our own integrity. That's it. And if you give that up, you have no control.
Mm.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jeff. I'm happy to sign books if anybody
Yes.
wants that.